I'm going to get back to work today on stripping down this 1992 Jeep Wrangler YJ frame. I'm going to start with pulling out the Dana-35 rear axle, as well as the rear leaf springs, rear shocks. Then I'm going to work on pulling all these fuel lines and brake lines out, as well as the old motor mounts, which are still in place. And then I'll have it ready to put up for sale. So hopefully everything will come out pretty easy. First thing I did was I went ahead and removed the rear shock absorbers, which was no problem whatsoever. Soaked them down in oil overnight and hit them again with a little more this morning. Then just used the impact wrench with a 3/4 inch socket and a 3/4 inch wrench on the bottoms, and just the impact wrench alone on the tops, and that took me all of maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and there they are. Now hopefully the spring hangers and everything else, all those bolts will come out just as easy. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and try and get this rear track bar loose. Never going to use it again, but I am, just for now, I'm going to leave it hooked up to the rear axle on the lower mount, since whoever buys the axle, maybe they'll want it. And I'm just going to remove it from the upper mount. And it's same as on the front one, the T55 Torx bit on this, and the 13/16 on the nut. But where the front one, I was able to use the Torx bit with the impact wrench. I don't have enough clearance in here to do that on this one, so I'm going to try to hold that end with the ratchet. It's kind of hard to do with the longer Torx bit that I have. I just use the impact wrench back here on the nut. So there's the tools I have to work with today. Well, that was no problem whatsoever. The nut came right off. Now I just gotta tap that bolt through it, and hopefully the track bar will just slide right out. Okay, the rear track bar is loose at the frame. Normally I would pull out both ends if I was just removing a track bar, but since I'm leaving it hooked up on that end, it's probably not going to come out of this mount here until the suspension's all loosened up, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and try and get the brake lines for the parking brake, those parking brake cables right here. Go ahead and remove those, and I think that's about it. Then I can just work on those springs, hopefully. I almost forgot that I didn't unhook the brake line from the rear axle yet, which is no problem. It's just a 3/8 wrench here, which I've already got it loosened, and a 5/8 here, and that's all it takes to get that off. And then you just pull that clip off and the brake line will slide out of its little bracket there. Alright, I got the clip removed, just popped right out, no problem. And now it's just a matter of popping the brake line through there, and that's it. I got both the park brake cables loose. Just basically used a flathead screwdriver just to push in the little tabs on them, and they pulled right out. I mean, I know it's not a nut or a bolt or anything, but I do hit it with a little bit of oil ahead of time, because any dirt that's caked up behind these tabs, you know, usually will keep them from being able to press in easy. And if you get that saturated with PB Blaster or any other kind of penetrating lube, it usually makes most of that dirt just fall right out. I mean, if it doesn't come out right away while it's still in the bracket, you can sit there and just tap on them just lightly and the dirt will fall out, and then you can push the tabs in no problem with the end of a flathead screwdriver. But I'm going to go ahead and tie strap these up to that track bar for now, just to keep them from hanging on the ground. I just got done removing the nut off the upper shackle mount. 19mm works good on these. Hopefully it's the right size. Seems like it is. That's what I used on the front as well. I'm just leaving the bolts in place until I lift the weight of the frame and everything off the suspension. I'm getting ready to loosen up these front bolts as well. Hopefully they'll come off just as easy. I've got the weight of the frame lifted up off the spring shackle mounts and everything, so that way I can just pull the bolts right out. As soon as I get the rear bolts out, I'll jack it up just a little bit more and tap on the leaf spring right about here, and that'll knock these shackles right off the bushings, because usually they're a little bit tight and stuck. But once it's off the bushings, then I'll concentrate on pulling these front bolts out. As you can see, the nuts are already removed. This is actually going pretty quick. As you can see, the shackles came loose with no problem. Just tapped a couple times on that leaf spring and they popped right off on both sides. And as soon as that happened, that rear track bar just dropped on out of its bracket. And as I said before, it's still hooked up on the axle on that end, which that's fine. Now I just got to get those front bolts out. Okay, I've got all the bolts removed, ready to roll the whole axle and suspension and everything out from underneath this frame. It finally stopped raining long enough for me to roll the Dana-35 rear axle out from underneath this 92 Jeep Wrangler YJ frame. I was planning on doing a whole lot more to it today, but the rain kind of changed those plans. So tomorrow morning I'll get to removing the fuel lines and brake lines off the left frame rail, as well as the motor mounts and the bump stops. But here's the Dana-35 with the leaf springs and track bar still attached. The only thing I'm going to use off of here is I'm just going to take those shackles off and just keep them as spares. But I'm selling leaf springs and this complete rear axle. I don't need anything off of it for mine, since I've got the 1987 Jeep Cherokee XJ Dana-44 going into my 91 this summer. And the only thing I'm going to use off of the Dana-30 front axle, of course, the tie rod and all that. I am going to cut the spring perches off and use those, since I've got a Dana-30 front axle out of a 98 Cherokee XJ that's going to go in my 91 YJ, and I'm just going to use these spring perches since it's already got the steering stabilizer mount and everything on it, and they are those offset type perches that'll clear the pumpkin here. And then I'll just sell the rest of it as a parts axle, or maybe just go ahead and pull the axle shafts out and all that and sell what's good and sell the rest for scrap metal. But I mean, if somebody wanted to use it for a spring over application, they'd have to weld on new perches anyway and different shock mounts, so I mean, it could still work for somebody like that. But I don't have any use for it. I'm just happy to get rid of that disconnect. Just go for a nice clean look of the straight axle tube on that 98 Dana-30 that I've got. But that's it for today. I'll get started again tomorrow and finish this up. But they're finally out.